The lights are merciless. Every lens, every angle, every heartbeat of the broadcast captures the impossible stillness that follows Jasmine Crockett's final words. Ron DeSantis stands frozen, eyes darting toward the host as if searching for rescue. His mouth opens slightly, nothing comes. The nation, watching in real time, feels that silence hit harder than any debate line of the night. For a breathless instant, it's as if the studio forgets to breathe. The host fumbles a note card. Someone in the back coughs. Crockett doesn't move. Her stillness is its own statement, a calm carved from conviction. Millions at home watch, transfixed. The comment sections ignite, screenshots multiply, hashtags form in seconds. Every viewer feels the shock of power meeting truth and finding no script to hide behind. America has seen shouting matches, walkouts, name-calling, but not this. This is different. This silence has texture, weight, and consequence. It is the sound of arrogance cracking beneath the gravity of calm truth. A voiceover tone would whisper the words everyone's thinking. America just witnessed a silence louder than any speech. Then, the rewind begins. The screen flashes back to moments earlier, the handshake that wasn't returned, the smirk that carried too much confidence, the kind of arrogance that always assumes the microphone belongs to it. Crockett had been patient, measured, even polite. But when her turn came, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Every syllable she spoke peeled back pretense, exposing the hollowness behind the polished grin across from her. And now, in this very moment, the weight of that truth holds him captive in front of millions. The silence lingers just long enough for the world to feel it. Then, like a heartbeat returning, murmurs ripple through the audience. The host forces a smile that trembles under pressure. The cameras zoom out, but no one's looking away, because they all know something extraordinary has just happened. Something unplanned, unscripted, unforgettable. And as the nation catches its breath, a single thought rises among viewers everywhere. How did it come to this? Because what happened just seconds before would leave an entire audience in stunned disbelief. The debate was sold as a conversation, American values in a divided era. But from the moment the lights came up, everyone knew it would be a duel dressed in civility. Networks hyped it for weeks. Governor Ron DeSantis versus Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Two visions of America, two definitions of values. The stage gleamed under high-definition perfection. Flags framed the backdrop, carefully balanced between red and blue, as if unity could be lit into existence. DeSantis walked in first, chin high, suit immaculate, confidence rehearsed to the syllable. His smile was tight, more performance than warmth, the kind of grin that said, "I've already won." Across from him, Jasmine Crockett entered without fanfare. No grand gestures, no theatrics, just composure that drew eyes on its own. The contrast was cinematic. He moved like a man playing to the cameras. She moved like someone who'd come to speak to people, not perform for them. The host opened with the usual pleasantries, but beneath the smiles, the tension was visible. DeSantis leaned forward first, asserting control with every answer. He spoke in slogans, the kind of lines crafted for applause, freedom, family, strength. But there was something mechanical about it, something hollow. Every word landed, yet none seemed to connect. Then came Crockett, measured, calm, deliberate. She didn't counter with noise. She countered with meaning. Her first statement was simple. Values aren't what we claim under bright lights. They're what we protect when no one's watching. The studio shifted. The air felt heavier. For the first time, DeSantis's practiced grin faltered. This wasn't going to be another friendly debate. It was a truth-meeting image, and the cameras were hungry for a winner. As the discussion deepened, the contrasts sharpened. DeSantis, polished but rigid, every sentence sounding like it was tested by focus groups. Crockett, unbothered and unscripted, her authenticity. A quiet rebellion against political choreography. She spoke about working families, justice, and the kind of freedom that doesn't depend on where you were born or how you look. The studio audience leaned in. Something in her cadence pulled them closer. She wasn't trying to dominate. She was trying to connect. DeSantis, sensing it, interrupted once, then again. His voice rose slightly. He called her misinformed. She smiled. Not out of courtesy, but control. What the audience didn't know was that they were minutes away from the kind of television moment that burns itself into collective memory. Behind the polished stage and flashing banners, two Americas were colliding, one built on image, the other on integrity. The moderators kept steering back to safe topics, but the energy between them refused to settle. Every time DeSantis tried to frame the conversation around law and order, Crockett reframed it around fairness and empathy. When he invoked traditional values, she asked whose traditions he was protecting. Each response chipped away at the facade he'd built so carefully. By the second segment, social media was already buzzing. Viewers sensed the electricity building. Millions were watching, but none knew they were seconds away from a live television moment that would replay across every platform for days. The tension was palpable now. The audience could feel the power dynamic shifting, inch by inch, breath by breath. DeSantis looked away briefly, adjusting his notes. Crockett waited, her silence deliberate, her gaze steady. The cameras caught everything, the flicker of unease, the spark of confidence, and then the host cleared his throat and turned to the governor with a question that would change everything. It started with one question and one man who thought he had the answer on. DeSantis was never the type to stumble on stage. His career was built on precision, the cadence, the posture, the pause before applause. Every gesture was timed, every phrase crafted to sound like conviction. On the campaign trail, he turned control into an art form. Crowds followed his rhythm because he never let them see the strain behind it. He came from a world where confidence was currency, and polish could substitute for depth. The debates, the press conferences, the town halls were all performances, and he knew his role by heart. Reporters learned that he didn't improvise. He delivered. His brand wasn't warmth. It was dominance. He didn't win crowds by listening. He won by overwhelming. There were years of footage to prove it. Clips of him standing before packed gymnasiums, chin tilted up, voice cutting through the noise like a metronome. "We reject identity politics," he'd say, pounding the podium. "We stand for every American. Not special groups, not grievance culture, not the politics of division." His followers cheered, not realizing that the very sentence was built on the division it denied. In his speeches, words like values and freedom were banners, waved often and examined rarely. Freedom became something ornamental, beautiful in sound, brittle in meaning. When he talked about it, it was freedom on his terms, filtered through power, stripped of empathy. But that kind of freedom only works in one direction, until someone holds up a mirror and asks who it's really for. And now, across from him on live television, that mirror had a name, Jasmine Crockett. For years, DeSantis had dismissed voices like hers as emotional politics. He preferred clean, quantifiable narrative order, control, and the illusion of neutrality. But Crockett's truth wasn't built for his framework. It wasn't polite or theoretical. It was lived, layered, unapologetically personal. It carried the weight of history in every syllable. That's what unsettled him. You can debate statistics, but you can't debate the steadiness of someone who refuses to be diminished. There's a clip, buried in the archives, from one of his early press conferences. A journalist had asked him about racial bias in education policy. He'd smiled thinly and said, "We're not going to divide kids by skin color. We're teaching American values, not victimhood." It earned applause from his base and criticism from nearly everyone else. But even then, the pattern was clear. He wasn't speaking to unite. He was speaking to assert control. Now, under the studio lights, that same smile reappeared. It was automatic, defensive. When Crockett began speaking about her experiences, about justice, about fairness, about the difference between freedom as a slogan and freedom as reality, his jaw tightened. He leaned forward, interrupting with a phrase he'd used dozens of times before. "Let's be honest here." But honesty, in that moment, didn't belong to him. He'd built a career on commanding the stage, but not on connecting to it. His rise was the product of discipline, not depth, the image of leadership without its substance. That discipline had served him well with interviewers who played by the rules, with moderators who stuck to the outline. He could parry and pivot like a fencer trained to win on points, not conviction. But Crockett wasn't playing by points. She was speaking from presence. She didn't need to win applause. She only needed to speak truth clearly enough that silence would do the rest. That irony began to bleed through the air. The man who prided himself on defending freedom of speech now flinched at the sight of someone actually using it. He'd built his platform on opposing cancel culture, yet every instinct in him wanted to cut her off, to contain her, to redirect the narrative back to his control. The audience sensed the shift, the imbalance. DeSantis wasn't facing an opponent. He was facing authenticity, and authenticity doesn't yield to authority. It's strange how years of performance can betray you when faced with something real. He had practiced every answer, polished every line, but none of that training prepared him for a voice that wasn't trying to outshout him, only outlast him. For the first time in his career, the script didn't fit. The rhythm faltered, the control cracked. His eyes flicked toward the camera, then back to the woman across from him who refused to shrink. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a realization began to form, one he'd never admit but could no longer escape. He had spent years perfecting his talking points, but nothing could prepare him for someone who wouldn't play by his script, before the lights, before the headlines, before her name became shorthand for unshakable composure. Jasmine Crockett was a public defender in a courthouse that smelled of old paper and quiet desperation. The walls there didn't echo with applause, they absorbed it. Her clients weren't donors or lobbyists. They were people who'd been forgotten, folded out of the system's promise. She learned early that justice wasn't blind, it just often refused to look. In those early years, she spoke less and listened more. She learned the language of pain, how to translate it into arguments that might survive long enough to reach a judge's conscience. That's where her calm was born, not from temperament but from necessity. When everyone else shouted to be heard, she learned the power of speaking so clearly that silence had no choice but to listen. Law school had sharpened her intellect. The courtroom honed her restraint. She realized that truth, when carried with dignity, doesn't need volume, it needs endurance. While others memorized their lines for the cameras, she memorized the faces of people the system didn't bother to name. Every case was a small rebellion against cynicism. Every verdict, win or lose, added weight to her quiet conviction that empathy wasn't weakness, it was weaponry. When she stepped into politics, that conviction followed her like a shadow she never tried to outrun. She didn't campaign with perfect lighting or pre-written sound bites. She campaigned with stories of single mothers evicted for speaking up, of workers punished for organizing, of kids taught to hide parts of themselves to feel safe. Her speeches didn't always soar, but they always landed. They carried a heartbeat. What set her apart wasn't charisma, though she had it. It was steadiness, the kind that made people believe she wouldn't flinch when it mattered most. When others built brands, she built bridges. Her authenticity didn't fit into headlines easily because it wasn't performative. It was earned. On the night of the live broadcast, that same authenticity was her quiet armor. She arrived early, alone, a small notebook in her hand. Not a teleprompter, not a stack of prepared remarks, just that notebook. It wasn't for notes. It was for grounding. Inside were fragments of reminders she'd written to herself over the years. Stay present. Stay human. Don't let noise steal the message. When the production assistant handed her the question sheet, she barely glanced at it. "I'll answer what's asked," she said with a smile that didn't need explanation. The studio felt colder than most rooms she'd faced, but her calm never cracked. Every step, every pause, every breath was deliberate. She carried herself like someone who had already survived worse than public scrutiny, because she had. She'd stood in rooms where verdicts were predetermined, where bias wore a robe, where truth had to fight its way past perception. Compared to that, a televised debate was just another stage, only brighter. As the show began, her pen rested between her fingers not to write, but as something familiar, a small anchor in a sea of performance. Across from her, DeSantis straightened his tie, adjusting for optics. She adjusted her focus, preparing for honesty. The difference was subtle but seismic. Her calm wasn't emptiness, it was discipline. She knew that in politics, the loudest person often wins the moment, but the calmest one wins the memory. Her words weren't rehearsed because her truth didn't need rehearsal. It was live. Every time she faced condescension, the tone, the interruptions, The polite smirk. She remembered the faces of her clients, her community, her ancestors who were told to wait their turn. That memory didn't make her angry. It made her precise. In the days leading up to the broadcast, her team asked if she wanted talking points. She declined. "If I can't speak from where I live, I shouldn't be speaking," she said simply. That choice would become the difference between a line forgotten by morning and a moment that would echo for years. The audience, watching at home, didn't know her full story. How many times she'd been told she was too direct, how many panels she'd been invited to for diversity optics but not for expertise. They only saw the poise, not the preparation behind it. But that was the beauty of it. She didn't carry her scars as evidence. She carried them as experience. So when the debate began, her tone wasn't defensive. It was grounded. She wasn't trying to prove herself to him or to anyone. She had nothing to prove, only something to protect. The principle that truth deserved composure even under fire. When DeSantis first interrupted, she didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply paused, letting the air grow still until his own words hung awkwardly in the silence. Then she continued, unshaken. That was her power. She understood that in the noise of politics, stillness could be thunderous. Her authenticity wasn't a tactic. It was survival turned into grace. Every movement told a story. The way she folded her hands between questions. The way her eyes softened before landing a sharp line. The way she never once looked at the camera for validation. She didn't need the nation to love her. She only needed them to listen. And when she finally did speak, every sentence felt like it had been waiting years to be said. It wasn't defiance. It was the kind that comes from knowing you're no longer asking permission to exist, because the woman who had faced injustice in courtrooms was now about to face it under the nation's brightest lights. The first question was barely finished before the tension in the room changed shape. The host spoke with the smooth cadence of television neutrality, but everyone could feel the charge beneath it. Two visions of America sharing one stage, and only one mic at a time. DeSantis seized it first. He spoke quickly, confidently, his voice lined with the kind of certainty that sells well in sound bites. "What this country needs," he began, "is discipline again. Not feelings, not excuses, not the politics of division." The words rolled off him like a practiced sermon. The audience nodded politely, trained by habit to reward command. Crockett listened, expression unreadable, hands folded around that same pen resting on her lap. When it was her turn, she began softly. "Discipline doesn't control its fairness. And if you're only enforcing it against some Americans, then it isn't discipline at all." It should have landed. It did. But DeSantis couldn't let the silence stretch long enough for it to breathe. He jumped back in, talking over her mid-sentence, his voice tightening with irritation. "Congresswoman, with all due respect," he started but didn't stop. He framed her examples as emotional anecdotes, calling her perspective selective outrage. Each interruption was sharper than the last. The host tried to regain footing, but control was slipping fast. The conversation fractured into overlapping words, his, hers, the moderator's. The crowd began to murmur, uncertain whether they were watching a debate or a dominance display. Cameras caught the flicker of frustration on Crockett's face, not at the disrespect itself, but at how predictable it was. Still, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't even shift her posture. She waited. When DeSantis finally paused to breathe, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said, "I've seen this before." Then, in that same even tone that had carried her through courtrooms and committee hearings, she said, "You know, Governor, it's interesting how you speak about discipline while interrupting every woman who tries to answer you." A ripple ran through the audience. The host's eyebrows lifted. For a second, DeSantis laughed at the short, nervous kind, but it didn't erase the sting. He straightened his papers, forced a chuckle, and shot back, "I just believe in facts, Congresswoman, not feelings." Crockett didn't flinch. "So do I," she replied, voice steady. "That's why I brought some." She gestured lightly toward her notes, untouched since the debate began. "The problem isn't that the facts are emotional. It's that they make people uncomfortable." The audience murmured louder now, sensing something shifting. DeSantis's confidence began to feel rehearsed. her composure more alive. He tried to regain footing, leaning into his favorite themes, law, order, moral backbone, but his rhythm stumbled. The more he spoke, the less it sounded like strength and more like deflection. The host interjected, asking Crockett to elaborate. She did calmly, with detail. She cited numbers, shared stories, tied statistics to lived reality. Every example was measured, deliberate. DeSantis tried to interrupt again, but this time the audience sighed audibly. The moderator's eyes darted to him with quiet warning. That was the moment the energy shifted completely. The power dynamic inverted without a single shout. DeSantis leaned back, arms crossed, smirk returning like armor. "Well," he said, "I think we all know where this congresswoman stands." Crockett met his gaze unblinking. "Yes," she said, "with the people you keep talking about but never talk to." The studio went still. Even the hum of the light seemed to dim for a second. The audience exchanged looks, some stunned, some delighted, some simply silent. DeSantis blinked, his grin fading faster than it formed. The host tried to pivot to the next question, but the air wouldn't move yet. Something had shifted permanently, the sense that control no longer belonged to the person speaking the loudest. Crockett leaned back, still calm, still steady, her hands folded again around that same pen. The camera found her eyes clear, composed, unbothered, and lingered there as if trying to decode how someone could remain so still under fire. And then, when the crowd thought she'd let it slide, she turned to him and the temperature in the room dropped instantly. The air grew heavy, the kind of weight that settles before a storm. The studio lights hummed, but even they seemed dimmer now, drawn inward, leaning toward the moment. The crowd had gone from restless to riveted, their breath sinking with the tension that had wrapped itself around the stage. Jasmine Crockett turned to face Ron DeSantis fully. No papers in her hand, no talking points, just that calm, unwavering gaze. "Governor," she began softly, "you talk a lot about American values, family values, constitutional values. But I've noticed something." Her tone was polite, almost conversational, but it carried the precision of a scalpel. "Every time you say values, what you really mean is control. Control over what books children read. Control over who gets to say they belong. Control over which version of America gets to count as real." DeSantis shifted in his chair, a slight flicker of his jaw tightening. "That's not," he began, but she didn't raise her voice. She simply continued speaking, her calm somehow louder than interruption. "You call it discipline," she said, "but it's really fear. And fear doesn't build a country, it cages one." The host blinked, unsure whether to interject. The cameras adjusted, closing in just enough to catch the muscle twitching near DeSantis's temple. Crockett continued, her words slow and deliberate. "See, the thing about values is they're supposed to apply to everyone. But when a migrant child gets separated from her parents, suddenly those values get quiet. When a black mother teaches her son how to survive a traffic stop, those values look away. When a woman wants control over her own body, those values somehow take a lunch break." The audience murmured, a low ripple spreading across the rows. DeSantis leaned forward, forcing a half smile. "That's an emotional interpretation, Congresswoman. We need leadership based on reason, not resentment." Crockett didn't flinch. "You call it emotion. I call it experience. You talk about the world as if it happens in theory. I live in the one where policy has consequences." Her voice carried no tremor, but every word landed like a quiet blow. The moderator's hand hovered near his cue card, as if he could feel the debate slipping beyond format. Crockett leaned in slightly. "You've built a brand on saying you protect freedom, but every time someone exercises it in a way you don't like, you call it chaos. Every time a teacher wants to tell the full story of this country, you call it indoctrination. Every time a protester kneels, you call it disrespect. That's not freedom. That's fragility dressed up as patriotism." DeSantis inhaled sharply, lips pressing into a line. The control that once made him look composed now made him look cornered. Crockett paused, giving him the courtesy of silence, a silence he could fill if he dared. He didn't. She took a measured breath. "You see, I didn't come here to win an argument. I came here to remind people what democracy actually sounds like. It doesn't sound rehearsed. It doesn't sound convenient. It doesn't come with a teleprompter or a donor list. Sounds messy, passionate, and human." Her voice rose just slightly. Not in volume, but in gravity. And that's what scares men like you, Governor. Because when people stop being afraid to speak, they stop being afraid of you. A few gasps from the audience. The host's eyes widened. The camera cut to DeSantis blinking rapidly, posture stiff, fingers drumming against the desk. Crockett went on. You keep saying we're divided. But it's not division when people demand equality. It's progress. It's not chaos when marginalized voices speak. It's democracy working exactly as it should. DeSantis tried to interject again, voice tight. Congresswoman, you're twisting my... She cut him off, gently but firmly. No, Governor. I'm reflecting on it. Maybe you just don't like the view. The audience erupted not in cheers, but in that low, electric sound that comes when truth hits oxygen. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply looked at him steady. The thing about public service, she said, is it's supposed to serve the public, not the powerful. The host shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Congresswoman, if we could, but Crockett's eyes never left DeSantis. You built a career out of telling people what freedom should look like. But freedom doesn't need your permission to exist. It belongs to everyone, or it's not freedom at all. The crowd was silent now. Even the background hum of the studio equipment seemed to fade. DeSantis opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes darted toward the moderator, then down to his notes. For the first time that evening, his confidence looked rehearsed, brittle. Crockett took one final breath, her tone softening into something almost tender. You keep saying you stand for freedom, she said quietly. I'm just asking whose. And in that instant, the air seemed to vanish. The line hung there, weightless, perfect, unanswerable. DeSantis blinked once. His throat moved, searching for words that wouldn't come. The silence stretched, deepened. Cameras caught it all. The empty space where an answer should have been. The faint tremor in his jaw. The collective stillness of a nation witnessing a rare thing. Accountability live on television. The audience gasped a sound that wasn't just shock, but release. The host looked from one to the other, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let history breathe a little longer. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She just let the silence speak because it always tells the truth about who's left standing. And for the first time, Ron DeSantis didn't have a word to say. It began like a spark in dry grass in one clip. 10 seconds long, shared by someone who typed, "You need to see this." By morning, it had ignited a digital wildfire. The silence that froze Ron DeSantis on live television now roared across every platform, replayed in loops, dissected, memified, turned into music, mantras, and movement. Within hours, hashtags dominated every feed. Her silence shut him down. Crockett TV's DeSantis, truth in action. On TikTok, creators layered her quiet final line over cinematic scores, slow-motion zooms capturing that moment her gaze locked on him steady, unflinching. On Twitter, political commentators called it the calmest takedown in recent memory. Instagram Reels showed side-by-side reactions, DeSantis fumbling for words. Crockett holding still like a mirror he didn't want to face. One tweet, now pinned to millions of timelines, read, "That silence said what generations have been trying to explain." Late-night hosts jumped on it next. One replayed the clip with exaggerated sound effects, then cut the audio completely, letting the silence play for 5 full seconds before the audience erupted in applause. Another compared the moment to watching the teacher finally take the class bully's phone. The laughter carried, but beneath it was admiration. Everyone could feel that something deeper had shifted. Cable pundits scrambled to reframe the narrative. Some conservative analysts admitted carefully that DeSantis looked unprepared. Others called it a masterclass in restraint. A viral thread analyzed every second of her delivery, breaking down her breathing, tone, and word choice like a symphony. Notice, one media coach wrote, how she pauses just long enough to make him hear himself. That's not debate, that's discipline. By afternoon, the silence had become sound again, sampled in remixes, used in motivational edits. One video layered her line, "I'm just asking whose," over historical footage, marches, rallies, courthouse steps. Another cut between her and icons of defiance, Rosa Parks refusing to move, Malala raising her hand, Amanda Gorman reading her poem, each moment threaded by Crockett's quiet power. In living rooms, Classrooms and coffee shops. People shared the clip the way others share hope. Teachers played it before civics lessons. Activists used it to open community meetings. Parents showed it to their kids with a smile that said, "This is how you speak truth to power." Even those outside politics felt the pulse. Psychologists called it collective catharsis. After years of watching anger dominate headlines, people were finding peace in calm confrontation, proof that dignity could still disarm arrogance. News anchors described it as a national exhale. One commentator put it bluntly, "We've grown used to shouting matches." What Crockett did was spiritual judo. She absorbed the chaos and handed it back as clarity. And still, the ripple spread. Artists painted murals of that moment, Crockett in grayscale, DeSantis fading into static. Designers printed her quote on t-shirts and tote bags. College students turned it into a meme template. When you ask, whose? And they've got nothing. Even a few conservative voices couldn't deny its power. One pundit, trying to stay neutral, admitted on air, he underestimated her. You could see it. He thought it'd be another sparring match, but she didn't fight his way. Underneath the noise, a quieter truth settled in. People weren't just celebrating a political moment. They were reclaiming something. A belief that calm could still conquer chaos, that truth could still outshine theatrics. For a generation raised on confrontation, this felt like therapy through televised justice. Comments poured in by the thousands. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. That silence spoke for every woman who's ever been talked over. Finally, someone showed strength without shouting. And somewhere between the memes, the debates, and the applause, the moment transcended the man it humbled. It wasn't just about DeSantis looking unprepared. It was about what he revealed when faced with authenticity, how power built on performance crumbles when confronted by truth that doesn't need to shout. As the weekend passed, the clip didn't fade. It grew. News cycles replayed it. International outlets picked it up. Reaction channels monetized it, and still, people weren't tired of watching. Each replay felt like a small victory in a long fight for clarity in public discourse. Because this wasn't just entertainment. It was emotional equilibrium, a cultural reset reminding millions that grace under pressure isn't weakness. It's power perfected. And yet, as the noise reached fever pitch, one question lingered quietly beneath it all. If silence could say so much, what did it expose? Because the real story wasn't about the silence. It was about what it revealed. The cameras went dark. The studio emptied and the clip circulated endlessly. But the lesson it carried was bigger than the debate itself. What transpired that night wasn't just a clash of politicians. It was a parable about America's ongoing struggle between noise and integrity, between spectacle and substance. On one side, performance reigned, polished to perfection, eager for applause. On the other, presence spoke volumes, calibrated, human, unyielding. Jasmine Crockett's silence wasn't passive. It was accountability made visible. It reminded the nation that strength doesn't always announce itself with volume or grandstanding. Sometimes it's measured, precise, unwavering, and its impact resonates far deeper because of it. That pause, that quiet challenge became a mirror reflecting what the country often overlooks: the courage it takes to stand firm, to speak truth not for attention, but for justice. In workplaces, in classrooms, in homes across the country, people began to recognize the resonance of that moment. It wasn't a lesson in politics alone. It was a lesson in life. How often do we allow arrogance to dominate conversation? How often do we silence ourselves to avoid confrontation or raise our voices in futility? Crockett showed that composure, the kind built from years of experience, empathy, and integrity, can be more disruptive to entrenched power than shouting ever could. The symbolism of the silence cut across every line of sight. It wasn't weakness. It was deliberate force. It told viewers that accountability doesn't need to be loud, that standing tall doesn't require theatrics, that the values we claim as a nation, fairness, dignity, courage, are only as real as our willingness to embody them when it matters most. And in that stillness, there was universality. Every parent guiding their child through difficult truths, every student pushing back respectfully against an unjust rule, every colleague pointing out inequity without yelling. All of them could see themselves reflected in that moment, because sometimes the loudest moment in America is when truth refuses to shout. The nation's social feeds had erupted with applause. Memes, analysis threads, and debates, yet beneath all of that, a quieter inspiration had settled in. People weren't just watching a political takedown. They were witnessing the embodiment of a principle, that integrity can demand attention without demanding noise, and that dignity doesn't need an audience to be profound. Crockett's poise reminded viewers that courage isn't always explosive. It's persistent. It's intentional. It's the pause before speaking, the words chosen carefully, the calm that radiates confidence. In a world increasingly obsessed with spectacle, she showed that substance has a power all its own. By the time discussions and debates settled into opinion columns and nightly recaps, the moral was clear: America doesn't need more noise. It needs more people willing to stand firm in truth, refusing to be drowned out. That is the essence of citizenship, the kind of leadership that uplifts rather than diminishes, that inspires rather than intimidates. As the clip continued to be replayed, it became a quiet reminder that dignity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to bow. And in refusing to bow, it teaches a lesson that echoes far beyond the cameras. Across dinner tables, classrooms, and office spaces, wherever integrity meets challenge, wherever calm confronts chaos, wherever truth waits to be spoken. That night wasn't just a debate. It was a masterclass in courage, in authenticity, in the enduring strength of restraint. And for millions watching, it became more than entertainment. It became a call to embody that same courage in their own lives, to let calm, reason, truth, and integrity guide them, even when the world insists on shouting louder. Because the story wasn't about winning or losing. It was about showing that dignity, unshaken, unyielding, and unapologetic, can speak louder than any voice amplified by stage lights. The moment has passed, but the echo lingers. His silence said it all, and in that silence was more than defeat. It was revelation, a reminder that arrogance, no matter how polished, cannot withstand the weight of calm, unwavering truth. For a heartbeat, the nation watched as performance met authenticity. And authenticity didn't just survive, it commanded attention. The clip will replay endlessly, but its meaning endures far beyond the cameras. It captured a universal truth. Strength is not always loud, and courage is not always visible in volume. In a world obsessed with noise, sometimes the most powerful act is to remain composed. Let facts speak, and let integrity do the work. Jasmine Crockett didn't shout. She didn't dramatize. She simply held her ground, and the world took notice. Her poise turned the ordinary into extraordinary, transforming a televised debate into a lesson for every office, classroom, and household where truth must stand up against the comfortable narrative of control. Because when truth stands calm in the storm, even power must pause to feel its weight. And now it's your turn. If you believe dignity should never be silenced, hit subscribe. Because this isn't just commentary, it's justice in action. Let the silence resonate. Let the lesson settle. Let the courage of one woman remind us all that composure, clarity, and conviction will always carry farther than spectacle ever could. Even when the lights dim, even when the cameras stop rolling, the moment endures. The silence still echoes, and it speaks louder than any words ever could.